Okay, in this section we're going to quickly run over how to create an ABV inside of Max. And an ABV stands for alternate bounding volume, and this is something Gabriel uses for collision. So it's a bit obscure, so the first thing I'm going to suggest that you do, it's based on, creating an ABV is based on giving it the proper naming scheme. First thing I always end up doing is pulling up our help document under the Gabriel folder in the start menu, going to the help document, go to the search tab and just type in ABV. And seriously, this is what I usually do when I end up creating an ABV, because I always forget the naming convention. And then under this list of topics here, you'll find one with the 3D Studio Max name in there, and that's the one we want. We want naming scheme, and so this is the artist naming scheme for the collision detection. So we're going to keep that open for reference. And so the first thing we're going to do, let's just make a sphere, and we'll make a spherical collision detection. A collision volume for this sphere here. Okay, so we make our sphere, and let's just call this our visible geometry. I'll just call it viz geometry. So whatever this is what you're visually going to be displaying in the game, and you want to make a piece of bounding, a piece of bounding stuff that is going to fit this visual representation. Okay, so then at this point we can go ahead. We could just clone this sphere. We can make a box. I'm going to go ahead and just make a box. So what we use when we create the actual ABV is we just use the size of the object. So the general size of the object is what determines the size of the bounding volume, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just make a box that is pretty much the same size of the sphere. Okay, and then I'm going to link this as a child to the visible sphere. So bang. Okay, so now if we look at this in the hierarchy, we've got the visible geometry and we've got this box, which is going to become our ABV geometry. So let's select that, and then really the last step that you have to do is just give it the right naming convention. So let's see, we want to call it NDL CD, which stands for NDL collision data, and then we want to make it a sphere because that's a very close representation of what the visible geometry is. And then we don't want it to propagate, so that is an N. And the propagate means if you've got something like a complicated character and you want to have it have one collision volume for the entire character, so that it only does a test against that one collision volume, and then once it does successfully intersect that one collision volume, then it goes in and tests a more complicated set of collisions. That's what the A, or the always propagate, stands for. So you can have kind of a hierarchy of collision stuff where you've got a simple collision thing and then you've got a more complicated collision thing happening underneath that. That's what the always propagate stands for. For most stuff, you're just going to be using the N for the never propagate. Okay, so let's give it the naming convention. So NDL CD stands for collision detection. S is for sphere, and do not propagate is N. Okay, so that's all set. So now it's got that collision naming on it. And the last thing that we have to do is just make sure that we got the ABV plugin in our export script. So if we go to the default process script here and we look and we see that, yes, okay, we do have this create ABV plugin in our script. So we just double click on this, and there's a couple options here as far as how you want to, whether you want to keep the proxy mesh around and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's all set, and then we can cancel out of that and we can just hit preview here. And this is launching our asset viewer. So we should see the sphere with kind of a blue, yeah, there's a blue ABV proxy of the sphere around it as well. Okay, and that visible button is right here, the view ABV proxy geometry. So you can see that this sphere does indeed have now proxy geometry for collision around it. Okay, and just for giggles here, we'll change this to a box, no propagate, and we'll view that. So the major types of shapes that we have support for, there's the box, and you'll notice it's quite a bit bigger. And this is because it's getting the bounding sphere of the box, and then for the main size of the object, and then it's translating that back into a box. So when you create ABVs, you're going to have to preview them and tweak the size of the shape that you're using a little bit to make it fit best. So the major types of ABVs that we have support for are spheres, capsules, boxes, half spaces, which is just pretty much a plane. That's good for things like walls. Unions, and that's when you want to try and combine, say, two boxes. Triangle is going to do it based on an actual mesh. And OBB and no test, I'm not sure honestly what they are. That's in the documentation. I usually just stick to these pretty standard ones right here. The other thing that might be useful as far as reference goes, if you want to take a look at a more complicated collision shape, we do have one of those. So if we go into the Gamebryo samples, let's see, there's actually a couple places that we have some examples. So if you go into samples, models, we've got a whole collision folder here with a whole bunch, just basic examples of all the types of collisions here for the basic ones. And then as well, under our demos folder, there is a unaptly named demo called Collision Test Static, which actually does, it's called static because it's doing static testing. It's some kind of code name or whatever the programmers use. But anyways, if you go into the art file there, under the collide, there's a Max file called collides, and this has a character that's set up, actually two characters that are set up right here with ABVs, and they have one larger ABV, which is doing the propagation to then test into more complicated ABVs for the character here. So that's also a useful sample to look at if you're looking at doing more complicated collision stuff. We'll just pull this up here too, really quick. Okay, so right here in this sample you can see as well they've got this larger box volume here, and then if that's intersected, then it starts testing with the more precise collision volumes for the limbs. Okay, and that about covers the basics of setting up a simple ABV inside of 3D Studio Max.